Episode 34, My Job in a Haunted House. Having a part-time job in school was a great memory for many. The friends that were made, the good and bad experiences, were all part of the learning process and a great introduction to adulthood. For Zach, his part-time job was thrilling, but at the same time, a horrifying experience that he will never forget. It was his college semester break, and Zach had a whole month away from school. So Zach decided to search for a part-time job to fill his time and to also earn some money. After looking around for a couple of days, Zach saw an online ad about a job opening at the amusement park, although it never mentioned about the specific job duties. From the ad, Zach could see that the spots were limited but were in demand. So Zach applied for the job without any expectations. But one Sunday morning, as Zach was having breakfast at home, he received a call. It was the amusement park. They told him that he got the job and he could start the following afternoon. Zach was excited as this was his first part-time work, and as the job was at the amusement park, Zach found it even more exciting. So the next day, after Zach had arrived at work, he was still yet to be briefed about his job duties there. Zach was waiting at the common area of the park's office when an HR manager named Sandra came in. After a brief hello, Sandra immediately took out a set of torn and haggard, gray-colored cloth costume, along with a long black wig and a makeup artist who was carrying a white and black makeup kit. Zach could guess what his job would require him to do. But not wanting to sound too excited, Zach kept his guesses to himself and waited for Sandra to explain. That was when Sandra told Zach that he would be one of the ghosts in the haunted house. Zach could no longer hold his excitement and smiled to himself, thinking that it was the best job ever. Not only did Zach love haunted houses, having the chance to scare people who would enter the house and be able to see their scared reactions afterwards, Zach couldn't wait to begin. And the fact that the job was going to pay him $25 an hour, Zach was ecstatic. Zach quickly told his mom about the job before he began. Zach's mom was initially not supportive of the idea, and told her son that doing such things might attract real spirits. She also told Zach a story about someone dressed in a ghost costume during Halloween and was eventually possessed by actual spirits. But as Zach told his mom that it was something he was excited to do, she reluctantly gave her support but told Zach to be careful about what he says while in the haunted house, and made sure not to overact, as it would further attract the spirit's attention. It was late in the afternoon already, and Zach had to quickly put on his costume and get his makeup done near the haunted house. A staff member then introduced Zach to the rest of the ghost cast before he was then brought on a walkthrough of the haunted house. Zach was eventually shown to the very spot where he will carry out his haunts. The spot where Zach was placed at was in a hospital setting, and Zach was a ghost patient that was supposed to lie on the hospital bed and sit up when people walked past his bed. Zach then had to reach out for the people and scare them. Knowing that this would be his role, Zach became even more excited. About an hour later, the night finally began, and Zach finally got to scare his first group of people. As they screamed and moved on to the next part of the house, Zach tried to hold back his laughter after seeing their reactions and felt ever so satisfied. Zach lay back down and got ready for the next group of people to scare. This motion repeated for the next few hours with a couple of 30-minute breaks in between. It was now late into the night, and between his scares, Zach took a quick peek on his phone to look at the time. That was when he realized that it was almost 2 a.m. and that it was possibly his last scare of the night. As Zach lay on the bed waiting for the last group, he thought about What a night he had. And to get paid to scare people like that, he couldn't be happier. While still wrapped in his own thoughts, Zach was surprised at what he saw peeking out from behind a wall to his right. It looked like his colleague Greg, who was dressed in an elderly female ghost costume, partially hidden a few feet away from him. But as it was too dark, Zach couldn't see clearly. Zach looked over, and as Greg seemed to open his mouth and whisper something, Zach couldn't hear him and wondered if his colleague was actually trying to signal to him that the last group of people were about to enter. So, Zach looked over to the left side where the people would enter from. However, he didn't see or hear anyone walking towards his area. Zach looked back at Greg, but he was no longer there. Zach then looked back to the front of his bed and saw Greg from a squatting posture, slowly standing up right in front of his bed frame. Although shocked with Greg's sudden appearance, Zach immediately asked Greg about what he was doing there and whispered to him that he should get back to his spot, especially since the night was about to end. However, Greg stood there still and kept quiet, while his hands began to grab onto the foot of Zach's bed frame. This was when Zach somehow felt that Greg was acting very strangely. Greg then vigorously shook Zach's bed frame as Zach tossed around on his bed and told Greg to stop doing so, while wondering what his colleague was trying to do. But soon after, Greg stopped shaking the bed frame and walked over quietly to the right side of Zach's bed. Zach then saw Greg bringing his face close to him. Zach saw that the face had vengeance in his eyes, and no way had the usual friendly aura of his colleague. Suddenly, Greg screamed with the highest pitch of screech that Zach had ever heard. It shocked Zach as he wondered what was going on with Greg. Zach became even more confused at how Greg could let out such a sound, especially since Greg had a pretty low tone to his voice. Suddenly remembering what his mom said about the costumes attracting the supernatural, Zach began to wonder if Greg was indeed being possessed. Greg then suddenly lost his consciousness while still on his feet and collapsed right beside Zach's bed. As Zach then heard the last group entering his area, Zach continued with the show, not wanting them to know about the situation, and did his best to frighten the group. As it was dark, the group couldn't see Greg lying beside Zach's bed, and they walked forward towards the next area. When the group was eventually out of sight, Zach called for the back-end staff members and told them that Greg had fainted. The staff members, along with Zach, brought Greg out through the emergency exit and to the rest area. The staff initially thought that Greg had fainted due to exhaustion, but after Zach told them what had happened, they also considered the possibility of a possession. To Zach and the staff, this was especially likely, as Greg screamed out loud before fainting, which clearly showed that he wasn't exhausted. The team of staff members then called for a healer to help with the situation. After the healer came, he poured spiritual water on a face towel and wiped Greg's face with it. Soon after, Greg slowly regained his consciousness. The staff members helped Greg to sit up and gave him some water to drink. Greg then slowly began to explain that although he couldn't remember anything about screaming at Zach, Greg said that he could recall standing in his spot before suddenly seeing an elderly woman standing in front of him. At first, he wondered who the woman was, as he didn't remember any of his other colleagues wearing such a costume. But Greg then saw the lady smiling at him, before his vision gradually became more blurry. Greg couldn't recall anything else after that. He sat there gradually recovering, while the healer went into the haunted house to cleanse the place and also wanted to see what it was that actually haunted Greg. Right after entering the haunted house, the healer discovered that a spirit was merely passing through a place that it found attractive, and in such a timely manner without Greg even seeing her standing there. Greg popped out from his hidden compartment to scare the people who passed by. The ghost took offense at what Greg did and thought that Greg was challenging her. So the spirit took up Greg's challenge and possessed him to take her revenge. But after the healer had cleansed the place, he told the staff that no other spirits would dare to enter the haunted house from then on. But even after being told so, Greg was no longer willing to work there after what he had experienced earlier. Zach, on the other hand, continued working there as he still loved his job, even though he was slightly shaken by the incident. But Zach also took what his mom said more seriously from then on. He knew that he had to be very respectful in the haunted house. Every evening before he began his shift, Zach would always make it a point to let the spirits know that he was just there doing his job and had no intentions to challenge or disrespect them. So, since that day, Zach no longer faced any similar incidents to the one he had with Greg. But even so, that experience always reminded him of his first ever part-time job. Not only did Zach remember the great scares he gave to the groups who entered, he also clearly recalled Greg screeching and shaking the bed frame, which brought thrilling memories from his job as a ghostly, sick patient in a hospital-themed haunted house.